Good morning. Good morning. Another wonderful morning here in Pretoria. It's actually overcast and there's mist in the air and it's cold and winter's here. So welcome to the show. Another wonderful Thursday morning, Vision 2026. And welcome to all our listeners and to our co-hosts. Great to be here. The topic today is a little bit different. We're going to try something new and would love to have your feedback. And we're going to be talking about the leadership mirror. Your team reflects you. And the question is, have you found this in your business? And we're going to have an open discussion between the panelists and myself regarding this question. I've often heard them say, leaders say they want accountability. But if the leaders blame, will the teams blame too? Because people do what the leaders say. They do what leaders model. Now, is that true? And let's have a discussion about that. So the question is, if the team, your team in your business behaved exactly like you, would you be proud of that culture? And that's what we're going to be discussing today. So I'm going to quickly introduce. We've got Wilhelm Lombard. He's a energy coach, a team's performance coach. He looks at, goes into companies and he actually analyzes your business and checks if your business actually works. And that's why we're actually he's going to be the main character today in talking and discussing with us about this topic. We've also got Mana, who's a business owner, successful insurance broker here in Pretoria, and she focuses mainly on insurance of fleets, of commercial insurance. So if you need insurance, please get hold of her. And then we have got Russell. Russell is a sales mastery trainer, and as he says, sales mastery can be trained. So great to have all three of you here today with us. So let's open the questions. And I'm going to ask Wilhelm first. Wilhelm, what are your leaders doing, and what do you find that your leaders are doing often unconsciously with their teams, and that their teams copy in the experiences that you've had with the teams and the businesses that you've operated in?
Thank you, David, and the rest of the team. I think before we really get to that question, I want to just define what blaming is all about. And we also said we are going to speak a little bit of Afrikaans today as well. But yeah, let's see. It all depends on our audience. Blame actually stands for be lame. So the moment when you blame, you are lame. You actually lose a lot of energy. You know, if I blame, let's give an example. If my wife blamed me for not fixing the tap, and the moment when she blamed me, I just sit back on the couch and say, sorry, honey, and I'm energyless, so I don't do something to solve the problem. But when she say, listen, guy, that tap is still not working, what are we going to do about it? Then it's a different story. Then I actually get up from the couch and say, okay, let's find a solution, and we solve the problem. So that is, in simple terms, what blaming is all about. Blame take your energy out of you, because the moment when you blame somebody, you are actually draining your energy. You sit on the couch. And when you blame somebody, the other person, you take their energy out of their system and they sit on the couch. So nothing is happening. So that is the bad thing about blaming, to be lame. Now, in workplaces, the same thing happens. In work teams, in marriages, the way you talk to your kids, whatever. And it's all about the words that you use. But if you communicate from out of a point of blaming, then you become lame. And it's a culture. At the end of the day, it's a culture. In the workplace, people blame. You know, the CEO might say, listen, I see you guys didn't do this, or you always, and you never, those words, always and never, altyd en nooit. Jy moet nooit daai woorde eers gebruik nie. Jy moet dit kanselleer en sê, want die oomblik as jy sê, jy doen altyd dit, jy doen nooit dit nie, jy het nog nooit dit nie, and the moment when you use that negative words, there's a lot of negative emotions involved that actually drain your energy. And this is what happened in the workplace as well. Managers communicate in such a way that they actually blame the people. And the moment when you blame, they become lame. So they lose their energy.
I love that connotation, Wilhelm, blame, be lame, be lame. Lovely. I love that. Mon, I'm going to ask you a question. You're a business owner, and obviously you work with your team. And what have you realized in the way that you yourself are with that team? If you're confrontational or you are blaming in any way, as Wilhelm talks about, what actually happens, or what have you found that happens, and how do you rectify that?
Well, I think you need to know your team. It's the first thing that is important, and you need to know their values and how they work. What works for me and my team is that I've identified each member's strong point, and we work around that. It's no use you put somebody who is strong in admin, for instance, and you force them to sell. It's no use to do someone who needs to be out on the road, to put them in an office to do admin. So you need to understand the person that you have employed and their capabilities and their mindset and how they do their work. So I think you need to start there. And also be clear about what your expectation is. Sometimes we would tell them one thing, but the expectation is something else. And my expectation might be A, and the employee's expectation might be B. So always make sure that they understand what the goal is or what it is you expect from them.
I love that. Yes, absolutely. And I like the point that as you say, put the person into the position or the job position or the job description that they are powerful for. I love that. Russell, from your point of view in sales, what Wilhelm's talking about, how do you see it in sales?
The best way for me to actually answer the question is to go back in history when I used to work for an organization that had 275 branches countrywide. And you can imagine if you have to control those stuff. If it was in retail, in the motor industry, when you've got a company that size with so many branches spread across the country, you then have to break them up into regions, and you have regional managers, and those regional managers have branches that report to them. So what's important is when you're going to have a look at, and I did a study on this after the fact. Once I left the company, one day I just sat down and I had this bee in my bonnet. I remembered most of the area managers very well, and I remembered their personalities through interactions with them on various levels. And then because we used to get the stats from our area managers, which would relate to how our areas did compared to other areas, there was a significant picture that started showing when I did go and have a look at this. The area managers that were open door policy type of people that got their hands dirty, people that did not do the blaming game, but people that actually rather sat down and said, okay, we know there's a problem, let's not focus on the problem, let's look at the solution, was the areas that were actually not just higher turnover areas as far as income, but also most profitable. I was fortunate in all three different areas that I worked in my time with the company. I had great area managers. I had area managers that had that mentality. But I also had a very, very strong director, and I'm going to mention his name. The company at that stage was called Mr. Exhaust Attire, and the director of the company, I want to mention his name and I forgot it. But anyway, he used to phone me like 2 days after month end, and he used to say, Peter Altersky was his name. And Peter would phone me and say, Russell, that's well done. You hit target. I'm proud of you, or we're proud of you. Keep it going. have a great month, shout if there's anything. The month I didn't make target, he would phone and say, I saw you battled a bit, and he would know exactly. I saw that your exhaust sales were down or your tire sales were down. Can I send a rep in for a couple of days to come and spend time there and go and meet your clients? You know, that mentality, and obviously supportive with a very strong area manager, gave us the opportunity as branch managers to really excel. We didn't have a fear of failing. We didn't have a fear of being taken out because of whatever reason we didn't make targets. And we really gave our best. But then you're going to have a look at branches and areas that were battling. And the funny thing is, a lot of those areas that were battling were in very, very strong regions. They shouldn't have battled because it was a more up. I'm now comparing a Sandton to a Germiston, for example. And these branches were battling. But it was because of the way they were managed. It was because of the area manager that kept on shouting, kept on screaming, kept on breaking down, kept on focusing on the problem and not looking for solutions. And that is what we have with client sales, because what happens is, as a branch manager, when you are elevated, when you're empowered, when the customer comes in, you give that. Valadim was talking about energy. You give that over. You are positive. You are energetic. You want to help the client, and the client feels that, and the client walks into the next store because they do go shopping and they don't get that same. And I picked up very, very quickly, and that's probably why I was one of the most successful branch managers at that time, was I picked up that my first response with a client, just that very first moment, the way I say hello, the way I shook his hand or her hand, whatever, makes a big difference. But it comes from top. It leads. It starts at the top and it flows down. And if you have a bad manager, bad CEO that is dictative and so forth, it will flow down into the team, and the team will experience conflict. But when you have someone that's open door policy, you'll have the opposite, definitely. So your client's experience is directly linked to management. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, I think from what you just said, I'd like to maybe let the audience just dwell on the following question. You know, when something goes wrong, what does your reaction teach your team or the people that are working for you? And I think that's something that's really important that we need to really think about. You know, what is how does your reaction, how does that affect your team or the people that you're actually selling to? I want to ask a question. How does how do we actually prevent this whole process of blaming or getting into the wrong interaction type with your customers or with your team? Let's talk a little bit about that. Wilhelm, how do you actually prevent that? What do you have to do?
Okay, just quickly going back to your question that you posed to the audience, and I want them to think about the feeling that you have. What is the feeling that you get when there's blaming? Because that is how we interpret the electricity in our bodies, by becoming aware of the feeling that you have, frustration or anger or shame or guilt. If somebody blamed you, do you feel guilty? Yeah, that I didn't do what I should have done, or whatever the feelings are. Because when you understand the feeling, if there's a negative feeling, it have a direct impact on you. You feel it in your heart. You feel it in your chest, in your heart. That's where you feel feelings. And that feelings determine what you think in your mind, because that then you might feel, but I'm not good enough. I always make this mistake. I just can't fix this problem. And there's all that negative emotions that actually influence or infect your thinking negatively. So I want people just to realize what's the feeling, because out of that feeling that you have, that negative feeling, you start to communicate, because now you try to blame shift again, and you try to change the situation to say, but it's not me, the economy is very bad and this happened, the deliveries wasn't on time, and so on and so on and so on. So you try to blame shift again. But the reason is, first, the feeling that you have, you feel you're not good enough, and now you try to shift it. Okay, so that was the previous thing. Now, how do we prevent this thing from that we blame? What must we do? And maybe we must, and what Marna said was so important, in the first instance, to know your people, to know what they are good with, to give them the right, the job to do that they are good with, and so on and so on. So it's important to know your team. It's important to know your team. What's the team player status of each and every person? Because some people are not team players, and they got ego problems, and they are not really, they don't really work hard. Maybe they dodge a little bit. They're busy with other things. Their focus is off on whatever. There's so many things. There's a big problem with emotional intelligence in companies. They don't know how to communicate to people. That can be a big problem from even the CEO. Just not knowing how people work, how to communicate with them. And Marna mentioned that as well. You know, communication is such an important thing to really, when you send the message, I always say the inside out of good communication is that you must take responsibility, and that's the key of everything. People don't take responsibility, that's why they blame. But the moment when you start to take responsibility, then you can be accountable, and so on and so on. But when you communicate, you must always make sure that the other person understands what you actually communicate.
Mm.
So it's your responsibility to make sure they understand. You must ask them, not do you understand, but how are you going to do that? And then they will communicate back. And on the other side, the receiver of communication must always take the responsibility to hear right. Hy moet reg hoor. Ek moet hoor wat jy vir my sê. Is dit reg wat ek gehoor het? You know, because you might hear some total different story because of your perspective, because where you are, and all these different emotions of frustration, of shame, of guilt, or whatever, also have an impact on your listening even, and so on. So there's so many things that play a role. You know, I usually say engineers think they are very clever, but they just think on, off, white, black. The switch is just flipped. But when you work with people, there's hundreds of different shades of gray, because we are all different people. So there's a lot of things that actually are involved here. But okay, coming back to how do you get the blaming thing actually out of the system, is to say something like, I observe this and I see what's the impact of this. How are we going to change that? How can we influence it? What can we do to change it? Now, immediately there's not blaming. It's you observe something. Yes, like Russell said, his boss observed that, listen, your sales were off this month. I can see the impact. I can see what it do to you. But what can we do to solve this problem? And he come up with solution. You see, blaming take solutions out of the equation, because we only put our hands up in the air and say, oh, sorry, man, yeah, this is what happened and the economy is bad, blah, 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 whatever things that you want to, verskonings waarmee jy wil opkom. So that is the thing. So change just the way you talk at the beginning and say, you're not my enemy, I'm here to help you. Because if people have this negative emotions, they feel you blame them, they feel they are not good enough, they feel ashamed maybe, they feel angry, frustrated, then you drain energy. It's an energy draining, it's an open door for just let all the energy go, and you fall on your back and you say, yes, I'm guilty as charged. Okay. And you become a victim in this whole process.
You know, one of the things I liked what you said there was the observe, I observe. But there's another thing that you actually also said there, Wilhelm, and is the we. How do we resolve this? How do we do that? And I think that's very powerful. And I remember one of my mentors early on in my life, in my career. I always used to say, I will do this, I will do that. And then he actually said to me, you know, David, are you going to do this on your own? Or is this a company thing that we're going to do? And that always used to stick with me, you know. And even in letters, I had to change, and it's from I will to we will. And it's very powerful that. Mona, from your point of view, how do you see, you know, as a business owner, how do you actually ensure that you don't go into a blaming scenario, or you know, into a place where you create negativity within your team when you're dealing with difficult things that you have to deal with?
Yeah, this takes me back to a couple of years ago when I started my business. I had 3 ladies working for me, and they were like constantly having this problem with each other, you know, sharing a big office. So the one would come in and say wop 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 wop, and then the other one comes back and he says wop 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 wop. And eventually I got tired of this, because you can't really get involved into those small little office politics, because you've got a business to run. So you have to kind of let them take ownership of their problems too. I mean, we want them to take ownership of their responsibilities. But if we're going to keep on sorting their problems out and trying to take the ownership back, then you have a problem, because then how are they going to be held responsible, because they can't take ownership if you keep on taking that away from them. So the one day I had enough. I really had enough. So I called all 3 of them in, and I sat them down, and I slapped my hand on the table, and I said, it's enough. The 3 of you are going to go into your office. You are going to close the door. I'm going to now go and wash my car. When I come back, this problem needs to be resolved. And let me tell you something, that something shifted that day. And the 3 ladies, 14 years later, are still the best of friends. And for that moment, they could not understand, and they could not get along with each other for whatever reason it was at the time. But sometimes I think when you want an employee to take ownership of something, of their responsibility, you need to let them take ownership with guidance. And then again, hello there. And then you need to let them solve it. And my policy is always, when somebody comes into my office and says, I've got this problem, how am I going to solve it? I don't know what to do. Then I said, okay, I want you to go back to your office, look at the problem for all angles, take your policy wording, and then you come back to me and tell me what the solution is. Because if I am giving them the solutions all the time, they're not going to be able to take ownership. So they would come back and say, oh, okay, I missed this and I missed that. And then you actually create somebody who can think for themselves and who can really take ownership of their position and their responsibility. But you can't take it back. Once it says, it says. But you can guide them. And also, you know, they need to know that there is no such thing as a stupid question, because when they walked into my office and say, I've got a stupid question to ask, I send them back and say, come back with another question, because I don't do stupid questions. So you need to let them take ownership and allow them to sort out the problem. And if they can't, then you guide them.
I love that. I love that. Take ownership and let them resolve the issues, you know, rather than you actually resolving it. But you're creating the space for them to resolve it. I love that, Mona. Thank you very much.
Because I think we need to remember that a business is not a dictatorship.
Yeah, definitely. You're part of a team. Russell, from your point of view in sales, you know, when sales teams don't meet target, and there's frustration, and obviously, you know, there's other issues that are happening in the environment. You know, right now there's lots of things happening, you know, oil price, etc. How do you suggest that teams could actually, or the managers of teams could actually better interact with their teams without the blaming game?
I think first and foremost, when we're looking at, there's definitely two different divisions when it comes to, and it's business in general, not just sales. And remember, all businesses sell something. So everything that happens from a business perspective has an influence on the sales, has an influence on the sales team. So I'm looking at it from that perspective. If you're looking at leadership and so on, so I've made a couple of notes. When you're looking at leaders that blame, there's a couple of characteristics that stand out very clearly. They micromanage. First and foremost, that's why they go into the blaming thing, because they want to tell you how to do your job when you have been employed to do the job and you've been given a clear criteria of how to do the job. So micromanagement is one of the things, but their communication is always subjective. Their communication is not objective. Their communication in the whole blaming and the micromanagement is subjective. It comes to how I feel, how you made me feel. I'm frustrated, and it's all about them, and it becomes a narcissistic pattern. It becomes a pattern where the leadership of whatever, the sales manager, the sales director, or the director of the company, it's about how he feels, and it's about how things make him happy. And in the end, it becomes a victim mentality. Shame. Poor me. I'm not being taken into account. I'm not being looked after, wada. The reverse side of that, which is probably for me the solution to this, is if you have a corporate environment or a small business environment with people, every person has got a task to fulfill. The financial team has got a task to fill. The logistics team has got a task to fill, and they need to be accountable for their task. Not accountable for the big picture. The big picture they add into, but they don't have the logistics team does not have the authority to do financial discussions and financial decisions. So accountability within the scope of what you are doing is number one. And all communication must be an objective communication. All communication must be what is for the best of the company. And I think there is a key element that we miss in small business and in corporates. I've seen a lot of businesses that I've been involved with, that I've pitched to and so forth, where the communication, when it's objective communication, it's uplifting. When it's objective communication, it is not, like I said earlier, not focusing on the problem, but finding a solution and being solution focused. So in a nutshell for me, and I liked Willem said it just now, EQ, and my wife talks a lot about EQ. When you're looking at those two different models, the biggest difference between good leaders is they are strong EQ. They are not, when you go into the office and say, you know what, this frustrates me, you did this, they don't go into a self-pity spin of a subjective communication. They are the guys that say, okay, let me learn out of this because my team is important. And if I grow, my team grows. Compared to the guy that is subjective, has got a low EQ, and he will always micromanage. Micromanage is blame shifting. It's, I told you to do this, those type of things. And what you'll see a lot of times is a guy that has got a strong EQ and communicates objectively is calm. He's not faded by the pressures because he knows where the solution, or if goes and finds solutions. But the reverse side, their voices pitch and they go onto a tangent and they get frustrated and they start being annoyed. I laugh at that because for me, that is just, I just sit and say, okay, well, listen, this is not a, the Buddhists have a good saying. They say that the way you treat people is a reflection on who you are, not a reflection on who they are. And I think that is what stabilizes this whole EQ type of scenario when we come to blame shifting.
Sure. No, that's very powerful, Russell. Thanks for sharing that. The next question I have, and I'd like to go around the room for each of you to answer that, and obviously give a different answer. So what's one thing a leader can do this week, or next week, because this week's a short week, that will immediately shift their team to a better space? I'm going to start with Helen. What is your suggestion to those leaders out there?
Well, I want to connect it to what Marna actually said, and where she mentioned the fact that she gave the team members the opportunity to solve a problem. And I think what is important when because that is sort of empowerment of your team. But when you do that, then you must, if they make a mistake, not blame them afterwards. If somebody make a decision, do something, you said solve this problem, and it turned out not so good, then don't blame and say, yeah, it was you. You make this stupid decision. How is it possible that you can do that and whatever? Because if you do that, people will they will become quieter. They will just nod their heads. Yes, okay, we'll do it your way, although I know it's not the right way. And they will not take initiative. They will be lame because you blame them for the decisions that they make. So I suggest that if you then empower your people, you give them the authority, because it's important to do that. They must be able to make certain decisions, but they must also be able to make mistakes, because you only learn from your mistakes. And if they make a mistake, you don't blame. You say, listen, I observe that this was not maybe the best decision. The impact that this have on us or the team or the sales, the outcome is this and this and that. But we need to solve this problem. We need to come up with some better suggestions. So guys, let's talk to one another. Now, if there's no trust between team members, it's almost impossible to have positive conflict, to battle a thing out, to talk about it, om het uit te redeneer, to reason that out. It's almost impossible, because people will just keep quiet and they say, let's see what happened. And that's a very bad culture. It's a negative culture. It's not a culture for business growth. So that is maybe the most important thing that a leader can do, is to build the trust that people feel they don't have to be afraid that when they make a mistake that you will blame it on them. But then it's okay, we learn from this, and let's move forward and make it work at the end of the day, because there's always a solution there's no problem on earth that there's not a solution for. So we must realize that, and we can solve the problems. And that over the years, I'm also 64 years of age, and if I see over these years, there was always problems. These problems with the war and all those things is not new, but there was always solutions, and we as people always come up better at the end of the day if we didn't blame, but come up with solutions.
Thank you very much, Wilhelm. Mona, from your point of view, what is one thing leaders out there can do this week, next week, that will immediately shift their team into a better space?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that you need to share the bigger picture to your employees, so that they can have an understanding on what your picture is. Sometimes we sit in our offices and thinking up all these weird and wonderful things that we expect our team to do. But we don't know their challenges. And I think to make them understand that, we sometimes do make mistakes, because we are human, and it's okay. Because all of us started at the bottom at some point in our lives, and we made mistakes, and we learned lessons from that. And I think if someone made a mistake, let them help you solve the problem instead of dictating what you think they should do, because what we have learned maybe 30 years ago might not be so applicable today in their world. Because the world changed every day. I mean, we've got AI now, and we've got a whole lot of things that are different from when we started. And I think we also sometimes need to think out of the box and trying to think like they do. And also make them feel that, a mistake, something I learned the hard way is that a mistake is not a mistake, it's a lesson, as long as you learn from it. And then maybe take the lesson to the group and say, okay, how are we going to resolve this? How are we going to maybe try that this does not happen again? And make them part of the solution. And that way you make them part of the company and part of your dream and part of understanding of what it is, what the culture you're trying to portray to the world out there. So make them part of that. Make them part of the solution rather than to give them the solution.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, when I was with Sun International, one of the things that we had to do, we had all these different companies, service providers being like Prestige and Fidelity and so on. And we had to incorporate them into the Sun International culture. And one of the things that we developed at that time was called Pay for Performance, where we actually brought them into the scope of what the aspirations and the vision and the mission of Sun International was, and that Pacific unit where we were at. And we had to actually get them to understand that they were actually working as one group to actually provide customer satisfaction at a very high level. And by actually getting them to understand that whole aspect of what the end mission was and what the end goal was, rather than their own little spheres of work, was actually incredible. And we actually got the whole team to work as one. And it was actually amazing. So I love that. Thanks, Mana. Russell, from your point of view, what can a leader today who's listening in apply in his business from a sales point of view with regard to this, blaming and so on that we've been talking about?
David, all three of you have pointed to exactly what I want to say, and that is communication, clear communication. However, we need to communicate in a different way as leaders, and the communication that we need to adopt is one of listening, not one of speaking. There is so many good case studies of corporates that grew from small into big entities because someone within the organization came up with a cost-saving element, or came up with a good idea, or came up with an IP that changed. And I think as leaders, we need to listen 80% of the time and communicate 20% of the time. And the 20% when we do communicate, it has to be very we-focused, not I-focused, because you are the leader of the team, but you're still part of the team. Definitely has to be solution-driven and not problem picking, net picking. And then I think the third thing is, I've said earlier, it has to be objective and not subjective. The problem happens is that's reversed. In most cases, we are lucky if the normal people in the business have got the opportunity to actually communicate at all. Because we come from the directors and we say that this is the way it's going to be and so forth. So, however, there's a very, very clear line when it comes to that communication as well. You cannot, as a leadership team, be dictated to by the staff as what the policies are. We're talking here about problems. We're talking here about when there are issues within the organization that the organization is facing, where the staff are directly influenced or directly involved. We need to communicate differently with them. And that is, what happened? Why do you think it happened? How can we stop this from happening? Let them talk and let them come. And I think both Marna and Wilhelm lingered onto the fact that, it's through hardships that people learn. And that's important. We take those hardships and we just communicate differently. So for me, communication is at the forefront of what we need to stop blame shifting and to create a healthy environment. And I'm sure Wilhelm will like the thought of a high energy environment where everybody is not, everybody's part of the team. There's not an I and you. We don't have islands in the business. We've got one island and we're all sitting on the same island. We've all got the same sunshine. We've all got the same weather. We've all got the same waves. We need to keep that in mind as leaders.
I love that. I love that. Thank you, Russell. Yeah, so I think the real question is, why is my team like this? It's not that. It's actually, where did my team learn this? And I think the final question that each person that's listening in should ask themselves, what is one thing that I, as the leader, need to change before expecting my team or your team to change? And I think that's something that's really important. That's a question that you need to look at yourself. You have to look internally. And there's a book that I actually started reading this last weekend. It's called Fight Less, Win More. There you can see it there. Fight Less, Win More. It's an amazing book. It's basically by Jonathan B. Smith and Derek Gaunt. I would actually suggest you start reading this book. I've actually started reading it. I haven't finished it yet. It's quite a thick book, but it's got some amazing insights in there. And what we've been talking about is really covered in that book. As a leader, that's something that I'd really recommend each of the listeners do. So what I want to do is just go around the room and just ask each of our co-hosts, what is your takeaway from today? It's been a very interesting conversation for me. And I'm going to start with Wilhelm. What is your takeaway from today, Wilhelm?
Well, there's so many, thank you, David. There's so many loose ends still, but blaming is a reality of life. I just want to quickly comment on what Russell said about the communication, especially in sales. I would suggest that salespeople must also communicate the bad news, because they tend to communicate only the good stuff, and at the end of the day, the product can't be delivered on the time they said it will be delivered or whatever. So communicate the bad stuff as well to your clients. Usually they understand. Many years ago, I was in AMC Classic Cookware. I was selling the cookware, and there was this wonderful electrical frying pan, and it was just the beginning of those things, and I sell a lot, and then suddenly on the production line I find there was a problem, and it was pulled back for more than 6 months, about 8 months. And then I needed to go back to my clients and said, listen, you are not going to get this within the promised 6 weeks. It will take 6 months to get it. Now, there was 1 or 2 people that canceled their order, but most people were okay. It's okay. I understand. So also communicate the bad news, not just the good stuff, because it's important that people know everything. But okay, your question, all this, bringing this together, I would only say, and that is what you said, David, you said it's about I must change. I can't change you. I can't change your attitude. I must change my attitude. So it's all start with me. So I would say, think about each and every leader, each and every person. Think about, where does blame show up in your life? Become aware of that. Just before you start to communicate with somebody, just think about, from what place are you now communicating? Are you communicating out of a negative, maybe frustration, anger, whatever type of emotion? And think about, am I busy blaming now? Because we are so used to blame that we don't even know we blame anymore. So we must become aware of that. And also think of, how does this influence your life, your relationships, whatever you do? How does it influence? What's the price, the cost of your blaming game that you usually play? So that's my story and what I would like to leave to you.
Thank you, Wilhelm. Mana, from your point of view, what would you like to leave the leaders and the people that are listening in today? What is your advice?
Yes. How often do we get to the office on a Monday morning and you walk past the offices and say, hi, hello, how are you? Kind of very generic, how are you? but do you even listen to what they're saying to you? So what I often do is I would invite an employee to my office, and then I would say, how are you doing? Is everything okay? How are you really doing? How's your mother? How is your grandfather or your grandmother or your dog or your cat for that matter? But really, really have an interest in your employees, and it will change the world. It will really, really change your business, because if you really care and remember that this or that employee had a problem last week with whatever the problem is. It might be something minor to you, but to that person it's something important. And you showing interest in their lives, make them part of your team, make them part of your family, because I believe my business is a family, and we all family. And I often say to people, I've got a heart like a taxi. When you walk into my door, you're part of my family. You're part of my heart. So it will stay there forever. Make them part of your family, and you will be amazed what you can get out of an employee then.
Thank you, Mana. Russell, from your point of view.
I think there's quite a lot that's, like Willem says, that still needs to be said and so forth. I think the takeaway I want to give, rather than to say what I've gotten out of it, is when I've seen business leaders, the real good business leaders don't have an identity problem. They know exactly who they are. They fit into their role. If they're a CEO, they are the CEO. They don't get flattered by people's opinions and people's thoughts and people's misconceptions. I am the CEO, and that's my identity, and I react from there. What does that mean? What does it mean to be the CEO? This is my responsibility. This is what I'm accountable to, and all my reactions stem from that. So I think it's very important for the business leaders out there that are listening. If you are the business owner like Martna, you are the business owner, and no one can challenge you on that. So you don't need to defend it. So you don't need to waste time on trying to prove your authority, because you've got the authority. Just make a decision. And if it's a wrong decision, make another decision to fix the decision. That is life. I think that we tend to put too much, like Afrikaans word, tierlantjies, on the titles and the positions, and we don't actually identify in that position, that title. So for me, in short, is a real strong business leader cannot have insecurities related to his position and related to the task that he needs to accomplish, and have any insecurities within his team. If he's got insecurities within his team, he needs to develop his team, and he needs to get his team on the level that will be able to reach the goals of the organization. Once again, very objective, not subjective. That is the best way to run a business.
Sure. Wow. Thanks, Russell. We've come to our end of our time, and I'd just like to leave each one of you and each of the listeners here today. And I'd really like to thank you for all being here and for your time and for just listening in. And please share this, and obviously subscribe to Vision 2026, and also to the Future Forward newsletter. But the question that I want to leave you with, or the thought, is if you worked for yourself, would you stay? I may leave that with you. See you all next week. We'll be back on Thursday next week. Come and join us for another interesting discussion. And I'd like to just thank Wilhelm, Mana, and Russell for being here. Thank you very much, and to all the listeners. And for all those who commented, thank you. And take care and have a fantastic week. Have a great weekend. And next week we get back to a 5-day week. So enjoy the weekend that we have. Take care, everyone. Bless you all.
Bye. Bye.
If I can just ask the curse to stay on until the end. Thank you.
Welcome to Vision 2026. We give expertise a voice. A platform where bold ideas, lived expertise, and real experience shape how we grow, lead, and create impact in 2026 and beyond. Meet your host, David Bauer, bid architect and strategic thinker, who helps leaders turn complexity into clarity and gives business leaders a voice that wins in the real world. Mana Rowitz, seasoned strategist and business leader, helping people protect what they've built and grow with clarity, resilience, and foresight. Glenn Leese Jones, Map4 life coach with decades of experience guiding people and entrepreneurs to find purpose, set direction, and map their journey to meaningful success. Russell John Fagan, sales mastery trainer, who brings practical sales insight and transformational strategies that help individuals and businesses increase their influence and performance. Wilhelm Lombard, human systems and team performance coach focused on helping organizations strengthen team alignment, leadership energy, and human systems so people are ready for growth before growth exposes weaknesses. Together, we bring unique perspectives and deep expertise so you can think bigger, act bolder, and make 2026 your breakthrough year. Hit that subscribe button now and follow Vision 2026 for your weekly dose of expert insight, future-focused conversations, and real-world perspectives shaping South Africa. This is Vision 2026, giving expertise a voice.